All right, so the rest of the lesson, we're just going to do a bunch of examples on how to solve by completing the square. So if we take a look at the second problem, we are going to start by subtracting the 5 over, and we're going to leave room to complete the square. So we will have x squared minus 12x, and then we're going to leave room to complete the square, equals negative 5. And again, I have to make sure that I add that same number to the other side. So to complete the square, we take half of the middle term, so negative 12 divided by 2, and then we are squaring that. So negative 12 divided by 2 squared. All right, so to simplify, next we would have x squared minus 12x plus, so negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. Negative 6 squared is 36. And then negative 5 plus 36 again. All right, so now we are factoring on this side and then combining on this side. So two numbers that multiply to be 36, add to be negative 12, will be x minus 6. And then we would have another minus 6, so I'm just going to write it as x minus 6 squared equals, and then negative 5 plus 36 is 31. Okay, so now we're using our square root property to continue to solve. So I'm going to take the square root of each side. So the square root and the power cancel, so we are left with x minus 6. And then the square root of 31, we can't simplify it because 31 is a prime number and it's not a perfect square. So we just have to make sure that we remember that we have a positive and a negative square root when we solve. Okay. And then to get x by itself, we would add the 6 over. And I'm going to put the 6 in front of the radical. So we will have x equals 6 plus or minus the square root of 31. And we can't do anything else because we can't combine those because they're not like terms. Okay. Now again, this really means that we have two different answers. We have 6 plus the square root of 31, and we have 6 minus the square root of 31. Okay. But I'm okay if we just write it as one answer. Okay, with the plus minus in between. Okay. Now make sure that you don't accidentally put your plus minus in front. So if you give me an answer that looks like plus minus 6 square root of 31, that's a completely different answer than what we just found. So make sure that you're putting your plus minus in the correct spot. Okay, so don't confuse where it goes. All right, let's do another example. So on 3, so again, if we're solving by completing the square, I'm going to add the 4 over and then leave room to complete the square. Then again, whatever we add to one side, we have to make sure that we are adding to the other. Okay, so again, we take half of the middle term, so 4 divided by 2 squared. So I'm going to simplify on this side. So 4 divided by 2, so I'm going to take 2 squared. So continuing to simplify, we now have x squared plus 4x. Plus, so 4 divided by 2 is 2, 2 squared is 4, and then we have 4 plus 4 on this side. So again, next we are going to factor. So two numbers that multiply to be 4, add to be 4, will be x plus 2 squared equals 8, and then we are going to take the square root of each side. All right, so again, that cancels, so we will have x plus 2 equals, and then plus and minus the square root of 8. So remember, we can think of that as 4 times 2. So the square root of 4 is 2, so 2 comes out of the radical, and then the other 2 stays inside the radical. And then now we just finished solving for x, so we're going to subtract the 2 to each side. So again, I'm going to put that in front of the radical. So we will have x equals negative 2 plus and minus the square root of 2 square root of 2. And again, we can't combine because this first one doesn't have a radical. So these would be my final 2 answers. All right, one more. So again, we're just going to start by adding the 1 to the other side. So x squared minus 2x, leave room to complete the square, equals 1 plus, and again, leaving room to complete the square. So this number, we just take half of negative 2 and then square it. So half of negative 2 is negative 1 squared, so I'm just going to write that. So that would be x squared minus 2x plus 1, because negative 1 squared is a positive 1. And then 1 plus 1 on this side. So if we factor two numbers that multiply to be positive 1, add to be negative 2, would be x minus 1 and x minus 1. So x minus 1 squared equals, and then 1 plus 1 is 2. Okay, so now we can continue solving. So square root of each side. So we have x minus 1 equals plus and minus the square root of 2. And then now we're going to add the 1 over. So x equals 1 plus and minus the square root of 2. We cannot combine or simplify any further. So that will be my final answer. Now before we continue, there is something that I would like to point out as kind of a shortcut as you start doing more of these problems. So if you notice this part, so if I take negative 12 divided by 2, that's negative 6, which is what goes into the parentheses. Okay? So same thing here, so 4 divided by 2 is 2, and notice how our positive 2 went into the parentheses. Okay? So same thing here, so negative 1 went into our parentheses. So that pattern is going to happen every single time because we're picking that number in such a way to make it happen every time. So if you can recognize that shortcut and use it, you can skip this middle step. Okay? But if you don't want to do that and continue to try it out your work, that is completely fine too.